The war wasn't declared, it was decided, across the stars. The sovereign Clayton ancient empire of cold logic and overwhelming force concluded that humanity would not comply with its laws. They didn't fear us. They didn't hate us. They simply found us inefficient. Earth was sent a final transmission: surrender, assimilate, survive. Most empires knelt before that message. Not Earth, not even close. The response came in under 5 minutes. Not from generals, not from politicians, from a kid in a satellite garage in Montana. He hacked the relay, rerouted the threat message, and sent back a single phrase: "Come and try." The Clade dismissed. It is noise, but across Earth something clicked. Cities didn't panic. They prepared. Not under one flag, but under one instinct: resistance. The Clade's first fleet arrived, expecting silence. They got static, jammed frequencies, garbled transmissions. And then, when they descended into the upper atmosphere, a coordinated burst of crude, homemade M-pulses disrupted their entire landing sequence. Not military grade, just clever. Brutally clever. Their transports crashed into oceans, deserts, jungles, none fatal, all frustrating. Their units deployed anyway, precision-engineered soldiers designed for domination. And within minutes, they were ambushed by farmers using magnetized rebar, kids with hacked drones, dogs with improvised targeting vests. It wasn't clean, wasn't efficient, but it was relentless. Every inch the Clade moved cost them time, energy, and morale. They expected submission. They got sabotage. Every city they tried to capture blacked out before they arrived. Roads collapsed. Bridges detonated. Not from bombs, from code. Humanity weaponized inconvenience. They hijacked traffic lights, elevators, vending machines. The Clade's clean war became a slog through chaos. That's when they began to study us differently, not as rebels, as anomalies. We weren't fighting for territory. We were fighting for the right to be underestimated, and we were winning. The Clade didn't fear death, but they began to fear delay, and humans were masters of wasting their time. By the second week, the Clade's analysts admitted something they had never recorded in any of their conquest logs. Humanity refused to centralize. Every attempt to target command infrastructure failed because there was none. Leaders emerged and dissolved out. One moment a grandmother in Nairobi would be organizing food drops through underground delivery bots. The next, a skater gang in São Paulo was coordinating citywide misdirection stunts using projection tech and hijacked museum holograms. The Clade couldn't find patterns. We weren't unpredictable in a random sense, we were unpredictable in a creative one. Each human cell adapted differently. Some used guerrilla tactics, others psychological warfare. Some just played loud, looping static that drove Clade sensory units into error states. They began capturing humans for interrogation, but that only made it worse. The more they tried to understand us through logic, the more confused they became. One report read, subject claims they booby-trapped their home with ketchup packets, glitter bombs, and automated insults. Units disabled. Moral impact significant. Meanwhile, in space, Earth's orbit became a graveyard of improvised defense. Satellite arrays reprogrammed to blind their ships. Abandoned space junk reconfigured to explode with pressurized paint and corrosive dust. We weren't building a wall, we were building a trap. And they'd already stepped in it. The Clade responded by escalating. They sent a second fleet, heavier, sharper, full suppression mode. But by then, we'd already learned, and we'd shared. The resistance wasn't limited to Earth anymore. Human outposts across Mars, Luna, Europa, even the outer colonies, activated. Sleeper protocols. Deep in asteroid mines and hydrodomes, workers turned drills into missile launchers. Terraforming systems were reversed into plasma cannons. Supply chains became sabotage networks. They expected scattered cells. They found a web, living, pulsing network of improvisation. And at the center of it, not generals, not AI, not any one ideology, just humans. Working like synapses, sparking, failing, learning, striking. Relentless not in power, but in purpose. For every inch they gained, we pulled 3 away. Not through brute force, through refusal, through unpredictability, through the terrifying efficiency of a species that thrives in collapse and turns chaos into resistance. The Clade's command units were built to withstand planetary sieges. Designed for decades of occupation and centuries of control. But they weren't designed for jokes. Not really. They weren't prepared for memes being injected into their visual processing units for weaponized absurdity to interrupt their strategic overlays. In one instance, a battalion was halted for 8 minutes because all their HUDs were hijacked with dancing cats singing in 17 languages. 8 minutes doesn't sound like much till you realize that in those 8 minutes, an entire convoy of human resistance fighters hijacked a weapons cache and replaced it with inflatable decoys filled with fireworks and pressurized honey. The Clade didn't understand what was happening because it wasn't happening on a scale they could measure. Their statistics couldn't account for emotional interference. Their probability models broke under the weight of irrational creativity. A garbage collector in Manila rerouted sewer systems to flood an entire Clade garrison. A retired teacher in Poland used old slide projectors and mirrors to create phantom armies that drew off entire drone units. Nothing made sense to the Clade, and that was exactly why it worked. Humans didn't care if they were outgunned. They knew the terrain, and more importantly, they knew each other. When one region fell silent, others adjusted, not in sync. In rhythm, adaptive chaos, a pattern too fluid to catch. And for the first time in centuries, the Clade lost their strategic advantage. Not because they were weak, because they were rigid. And humans, we bent. We bent so far, so hard, and so fast, they couldn't tell where the resistance began and where it ended. They tried to simulate us. They failed because our strength wasn't in replication. It was in surprise. In doing what made no sense and somehow made all the difference. One captured soldier said, "You don't win a war against humans by taking their cities. You lose by giving them a reason to laugh in your face." And that's exactly what we did. Every drone we took down, we tagged with jokes. Every fallen relay we rebooted with music. Every defeat was twisted into defiance. We weren't just resisting, we were performing. The Clade's communication protocols began to fracture, not because of encryption breaches, but because humans started mimicking their structure using nothing but modified social media platforms. A teenager in Iceland built a subroutine that translated Clade strategy signals into interpretive dance routines, which resistance cells used to decode and jam their assaults. On a broader scale, Clade command ships found their archives overwritten with historical footage of human revolutions. Speeches about defiance and audio loops of primal war chants layered over bass-heavy tracks that triggered their emotional dampeners. They weren't just being attacked physically, they were being infected ideologically. One commander filed a report that read, "Contagion of belief is non-mechanical, spreading faster than expected." Units are questioning directives, emotional integrity compromised. Their troops were perfect soldiers, but perfection cracks under contradiction. And contradiction is where humans thrive. We embrace irony. We find humor in despair. We make heroes out of janitors and legends out of failure. That broke something in them. They started losing units not to death, but to defection. Some Clade operatives began turning off their orders mid-mission, wandering into human shelters and just staying, watching, listening. They didn't know why. And that made it worse. The resistance adapted again. We didn't just tolerate defectors. We welcomed them, fed them, gave them names, let them paint murals. One former enemy combatant became a cook in a refugee canteen. Another started writing poetry in broken earth tongues. We never knew if it was strategy or instinct, but it worked. Because once the clade lost ideological control, the war became something else, a narrative. And humanity are masters of narrative. We told stories, we spread them. A girl in New Zealand animated a short film about a clade soldier learning to play guitar. It went viral inside their fleet. Orders were ignored for hours. Their clean war had become a dirty, loud, confusing mess of feelings, thoughts, and rhythm. They had expected surrender. What they got was culture shock, an invasion of empathy, and the terrifying realization that humans didn't just fight with weapons, we fought with meaning. With jokes, with music, with story. We didn't aim to destroy them. We aimed to confuse them into humanity. On the 50th day of the invasion, the clades shifted tactics. They went dark. No transmissions, no movement. Satellites showed their ships forming a blockade around Earth's orbit, tight and silent. The resistance went on alert. Panic threatened to spread, but the elders held firm. They'd seen this before in older wars when the enemy stops talking. They're preparing to break something. But humans didn't wait. We acted. Small teams launched into orbit using reprogrammed space tourism pods and retired orbital shuttles. They called themselves the Umbra Choir. Their mission wasn't to attack, it was to speak. They slipped through blind spots in the blockade and broadcast pirate signals laced with emotion-mapped frequencies. Songs, poems, snippets of children laughing. Grief recorded during evacuations. Declarations of love shouted into void. These weren't military transmissions. They were humanity's unfiltered soul. And it worked. Not all at once, not cleanly. But inside the clade fleet, something cracked. One ship turned its sensors outward and replayed the signals over its internal systems. Then another and another. They began broadcasting back, first in pure tone. Then with hesitant echoes, our people received them and responded with harmonies. Entire orbits pulsed with a weird, beautiful music, a call and response between species that had never understood each other. Resistance fighters on Earth called it the turning. The moment when the clades stopped acting like machines and started feeling. Not all of them, not enough to win the war, but enough to change its shape. Their tactics lost sharpness. Their strikes became slower, as if part of them was hesitating. Listening, human scientists couldn't explain it. Strategists didn't try, but storytellers did. They said, we sang the war into something else. And the name stuck. The War of Singing Stone. Because by then, we'd started using resonance tech to carve counterchords into skyscrapers and terrain, creating physical zones of dissonance that disrupted their targeting arrays. Earth's cities became instruments. The resistance became conductors. And the clade, once the most precise force in the galaxy, found itself stumbling through a battlefield that sounded like protest, love, and laughter. They'd asked for surrender. Instead, they got a chorus. The War of Singing Stone entered its third month and became the most documented conflict in human history, not by governments, but by civilians. Every street battle, every hacked broadcast, every whispered conversation was recorded, remixed, and shared through the vast underground web of storytellers known as the Thread. Nobody knew who founded it. It had no leaders, just thousands of nodes uploading raw human experience in real time. Soldiers danced before firefights to boost morale. Parents told bedtime stories beside bunkers. Former enemies exchanged recipes under temporary ceasefires. The clade's command algorithms couldn't process the data flood. They tried to filter out the noise, but the noise was the signal. Humanity had weaponized vulnerability. The thread made us transparent, not to be controlled, but to be seen. And that visibility turned resistance into culture. Art galleries in the ruins, improvised choirs in subway tunnels. The clade destroyed 12 broadcast towers in Europe, only for humans to replace them with flaming drones spelling out the word. The clade retaliated hard. Focused orbital strikes, biochemical storms, psychological warfare. But each blow only made us louder. A child lost both parents to an airstrike. That night, they recorded a lullaby on a broken tablet. It was played on every pirate station for a week. And somewhere in the clade's command ship, an officer turned off her console and cried. Because even perfect minds break when they see. Truth without filter. The resistance had no single hero. No central message. Just a collective refusal to be silent. And through the thread, Earth became a choir of persistence. A planet singing its story while under siege. The clade finally realized they couldn't win not because we were stronger, but because we refused to let the war erase who we were. Their fleets still hovered above. Their troops still marched. But they no longer advanced with certainty. They advanced with hesitation. And that hesitation was our opening. Our symphony. Our resistance. Not of steel or blood, but of sound. A sound they would never unhear. The thread didn't stop at humans. Something strange began to happen as more clade defectors abandoned their posts. They started contributing. One uploaded a melody they claimed came from their ancestor cores, altered by Earth's harmonic frequencies. Another wrote a children's story about a human who taught stars to blink in Morse code. We didn't ask them to. They just did. That was the difference. The clade had always operated on strict code, unquestionable hierarchy, logic above emotion. But now logic was bleeding. They couldn't contain it. Some units refused refueling unless they were allowed to listen to thread broadcasts. Others modified their armor to mimic human clothing styles. A scout ship etched graffiti into its hull. This world makes no sense. I want to stay. It wasn't total collapse, but it was drift. The kind that weakens systems from the inside. Earth's resistance didn't celebrate. We observed, adjusted. A council of artists, hackers, elders, and rogue clade thinkers formed the Khorasan decentralized group focused on emotional warfare. Not manipulation, resonance, they began seeding. Encoded messages into the clade's sleep cycles using low-frequency transmissions embedded in ambient broadcasts. Not commands. Dreams. The dream of being human. Waking up to smell, to taste, to hear unfiltered laughter. Some units self-destructed. Others shut down voluntarily. But many awakened with a glitch that looked like curiosity. In battlefields. Instead of attacking, some simply watched. A soldier once reported staring at a clade warrior for 9 minutes before the being blinked and walked away. Not retreating, just ... choosing not to fight. That moment went viral. Not just among humans, among the clade. And while their central command tightened its grip, issuing purge orders and disciplinary resets, resistance had already spread into the cracks. The war wasn't just physical anymore. It was metaphysical, a battle for what it meant to feel. And humans had centuries of practice in feeling everything. We turned chaos into a signal, grief into comedy, destruction into dance. And now, even, our enemies were humming along. Not many, not enough, but enough to notice. Enough to know that surrender wasn't coming from us. It was coming from them. Quietly, softly, in dreams they never meant to have. When the clade's central core finally issued Directive Zero full planetary sterilization, humanity braced for extinction. But not in fear. In fury, Earth didn't cry. It roared. The thread surged with a million voices, not begging, not pleading, but declaring. Artists painted the sky with synchronized drone flares, spelling out the word "remember." Musicians coordinated global broadcasts of a single heartbeat rhythm, transmitted from mountaintops and ocean trenches. Children traced their names into the soil with bioluminescent seeds. Grandmothers recited ancient prayers mixed with pop song lyrics. It wasn't a cry for mercy. It was a message. If we go unforgettable. The clade's fleets formed alignment. Plasma tethers, kinetic rods. Orbit turned red with targeting light. That's when humanity did something no war council predicted. We stopped hiding. The chorus initiated Project Open Palm. Resistance cells left shelters, stepped into the open, and lit bonfires on rooftops. Not weapons, not defenses, just light. Thousands of fires, synchronized like a heartbeat all across the planet. People held hands. Strangers sang. One man stood on a frozen lake, holding a sign that said, "We see you." A moment passed, then another, and the sky changed. The clade fleet paused, sensors overloaded, because they saw not targets but stories, not strategies but souls. Enough of their own had drifted, changed, felt, that the hesitation spread like virus code. Ship after ship fell out of formation. Some turned, some powered down. Some joined the light. And though many still remained rigid, loyal programmed momentum was lost, because they realized what humanity had truly weaponized. Not war, not chaos, not even resistance, but remembrance. We didn't want to win. We wanted to be remembered. And that shook them more than any missile ever could. We weren't ghosts. We were echoes that refused to fade. The directive was never launched, not because we stopped them, but because they couldn't pull the trigger while listening to lullabies. The war didn't end that night, but it changed forever. After Directive Zero failed, Earth entered a strange silence. Not peace, a pause. The clade fleet still circled, fractured but not gone, and humanity tired, scarred, yet singing held its breath. That silence lasted 12 hours, and in those 12 hours, everything shifted. First came the ripple from Europa, where a rogue clade ship began transmitting open logs, not orders, not threats. Memories, logs of soldiers sketching in their spare time, of units requesting human literature samples, of anonymous voices describing what it felt like to taste chocolate for the first time. The thread picked it up and mirrored it across Earth, not to mock. To honor, we began replying, not with strategy, with stories. A farmer from Idaho sent in a voice recording of his daughter, naming each star with her own made-up words. A nurse from Nairobi posted a video of a clade defectee clumsily learning to bake bread. And in return, a clade cruiser turned on its lights in the rhythm of the human alphabet. A message, we're still listening. The chorus took the lead, carefully amplifying signals that felt like resonance, discouraging those that reeked of manipulation. This was no longer about winning or losing. It was about remembering how to speak across the void. Earth's governments argued, debated, positioned. But the thread didn't wait for permission. A coalition of civilians from over 80 countries initiated the Exchange-An open channel between clade and human minds. Moderated not by code, but by poets, children, musicians, empaths. Every shared word became a song, every hesitation a verse, and slowly, painfully. What began as resistance transformed into something braver. Vulnerability, we didn't stop preparing. Defense systems still stood ready. Watchers still scanned the stars, but the focus shifted. For the first time in known galactic history, a war paused, not because of fear, or surrender, or exhaustion, but because both sides were finally curious. Enough to ask, what else is there? The clade had expected compliance or extinction. What they found instead was humanity's oldest trick: connection, not through dominance, through sharing, through light, through story, through the stubborn. Refusal to go quietly, and Earth, our messy, defiant, broken Earth, became the center of something entirely new. The Galactic Archive, long sealed to primitive species, registered its first human entry 73 days after the war's pause. It wasn't a general or scientist. It was a child, 7 years old. Earthborn, she had been uploading bedtime stories through a cracked tablet connected to a jury-rigged satellite node in what used to be rural Canada. Somehow, one of her stories, a reimagining of a clade scout as a lonely bird, was picked up, reviewed, and verified by the archives. To my conscious curators, that verification triggered a cascade. Clade memory clusters began to accept Earth's emotional imprints as valid entries. Songs became records. Poems became data. Our tears were categorized alongside their ancient laws. For the first time in recorded history, emotion was considered archival truth. Resistance fighters called it the soft victory. The war didn't end with banners or treaties. It ended with acceptance. The clade never formally surrendered, but they never attacked again. Their ships drifted farther with each cycle, some settling in distant orbit, others leaving our solar system entirely. A few stayed. Those that did became part of something stranger than peace: integration without conquest, connection without compromise. One clade Manek now teaches biology at a floating school in the Pacific Rim. Another became a conductor for what was once the Paris Metro. Now a subterranean symphony line where music guides the movement of trains. Earth, still bruised, never rebuilt the same way. Cities remained cracked, wild. Monuments stood beside wreckage. We didn't clean the scars. We honored them. Every mark told the story of a moment we refused to die quietly. Humanity kept telling those stories through thread, through voice, through memory etched into stone and data. And the clade, in their own strange way, began to do the same. Not all, not most, but enough. Enough to carry the echo across stars. Enough to remember a war not for its fire, but for its song. And in that remembrance, resistance was reborn not as defiance, but as legacy. A reminder to every future threat that if humanity ever faces extinction, we will meet it not with silence, but with symphony. Not all wounds healed. Some humans never trusted again. Some clade units struggled with memory loops, guilt cycles, identity crashes. There were moments when the scars reopened, when trauma surfaced in unexpected ways. A child flinching at thunder, a clade thinker locking down during a fireworks display. And yet, what held through those dark moments wasn't control, it was care. A new branch of Earth medicine formed, combining human psychotherapy with clade neural calibration. They called it echo-harmonics, a therapy of resonance, memory, and shared story. In one session, a human widow taught a clade soldier how to write grief into music. In another, a clade elder helped a boy sculpt his recurring nightmares into stone. Models, each one left along a garden path where others could see them, touch them, carry them. Healing wasn't clean. It never is, but it became culture. Resistance to forgetting. Humanity built the first archive temple, a place not of worship, but of story. Every voice mattered. Every moment was sung, painted, told. A clade architect designed its acoustics to allow whispers from one side to be heard clearly on the other. Not for secrecy, for connection. When someone wept in the west chamber, someone else laughed in the east. It wasn't coincidence, it was design. Earth didn't become a utopia. We didn't erase conflict. We simply chose to build remembering into the bones of our future. Children grew up playing resistance games, yes, but also writing the endings. Differently each time, clade children hatched under a human sky learned to ask questions before calculating answers. And in that shared evolution, something ancient awoke, not in the stars, but in us. A realization that resistance isn't only against the enemy. Sometimes it's against becoming the enemy. We resisted not just conquest, We resisted losing the parts of us that made us worth saving. When we faltered, when fear returned, we didn't turn to missiles. We turned to music, to story, to each other. That was our real weapon, the thread between us, fragile, invisible. Stronger than steel, that was how we won. And how we would never forget what it cost. Years later, historians would argue about when exactly the war ended. Some said it was the day the clade ships left orbit. Others pointed to the child's archive entry. Few believed it never truly ended, that it simply transformed into something else. I'd ask the people who lived through it, the ones who burned their fears into the sky with fire and voice, and they'll say it ended the day. We're no longer afraid to be seen. Visibility became the anthem of the new age. Not surveillance, not exposure, just the raw, sacred truth of being visible, of being known. Earth's art exploded into new forms. It's interactive murals that told the stories of cities using touch-sensitive pigments, music that only played in the presence of silence, poems embedded in algae that bloomed under moonlight. And across it all, the clade watched, listened, learned. Not as conquerors, not even as guests, but as fellow witnesses. Together, we became something the galaxy hadn't seen in eons. A hybrid culture born not from domination, but defiance. Not from peace, but persistence. Not from sameness, but from resonance. Earth didn't join the galactic community through power or trade. We entered through rhythm, through the slow, steady beat of survival turned into song. And when the next threat came, and it did, it wasn't just humans who stood to face it. It was the thread. The chorus? The children of both worlds who had never known a war without stories, never known a silence unbroken by sound. They stood together not with weapons drawn, but with hands open. And the stars, for the first time in recorded memory, did not tremble. They listened. And in that listening, the galaxy changed. As the years passed, the story of Earth's resistance spread beyond even the clade's former networks. Fringe species, long hidden or ignored by dominant galactic powers, began to surface. They had heard the thread's echo, not through official broadcasts or sanctioned archives, but through the strange, low-frequency hums that filtered through subspace. First came the Volari, a species of crystalline thinkers once considered mute and emotionless. They sent no ships, no envoys, almoi. Light patterns across deep space, synchronized with the old human heartbeat rhythm. Then the Mayan and sectoid philosophers, once enslaved by the clade, began transmitting emotional recordings layered with fragments of Earth's protest chants. Earth became not a power, but a pulse, and with that pulse came a tension, some allies, some threats, but none approached without hesitation. The galaxy had watched Earth resist the impossible, not through overwhelming strength, but through unbearable persistence. The resistance had become its own kind of deterrent, a message more permanent than any planetary defense grid. We will not go quietly. Our children grew up learning not just our victories, but our failures. It's not just our heroes, but our doubts. That transparency became armor, the kind no scanner could detect, the kind that made bullies think twice. Because how do you threaten a world that has made peace with its scars? One that dances where it once bled. The Galactic Council, long a shadow power, enforcing the hierarchy of progress, finally acknowledged. They extended observer status. We refused it. Not in arrogance, in clarity. We weren't ready. Because Earth wasn't built for sitting quietly in diplomatic chambers. We were still becoming, still healing, still telling the story of who we were through paint, music, rebellion, and care. A different kind of message was sent instead. One sentence, 6 words, we're listening. Are you ready yet? It shook the chamber more than any weapon Earth could have built, because it turned the gaze inward. The council didn't respond officially, but whispers began of reform, of memory, of resistance that looked less like fire and more like rhythm. Earth had taught the galaxy something dangerous, that the most powerful kind of resistance is one that never stops singing in the quieter corners of Earth. Long after the fleets had vanished and the skies stopped glowing with warning lights, people began to find strange things left behind. Not weapons, not debris, messages, tucked into caves, forests, old ruins. Carved. In languages we hadn't known the clade even used. Symbols painted in ash, etched in glass, pulsed into rock with sonic bursts. One message found beneath the Sahara read, "We thought we knew silence. We were wrong." Another, discovered deep in a submerged ruin off the coast of Japan, pulsed faintly in infrared. "Teach us how to feel, and we will teach you how to." Remember? So chorus began archiving them, not as enemy remnants, but as echoes, threads, gifts. Some humans rejected them, still raw, still mourning, still angry. That was fair. Pain doesn't vanish with poetry, but others listened. Not to forgive, but to understand. These remnants weren't strategic. They were vulnerable. The final transmissions of beings who had been changed, not by war, but by witnessing humanity survive it without surrendering its soul. Earth's resistance had done something no strategist could explain. It rewrote the idea of threat. It proved that culture, connection, and chaos were not signs of weakness, but evidence of a strength so strange it couldn't be predicted, only felt. Survivors of the war human and clade began to gather each year at the solstice of light. Not a ceremony, a remembrance, a retelling, no flags, no pledges, just stories. One child shared a poem written by her great-grandmother, who had fought, using nothing but a hacked music player and a stubborn refusal to hide. A former clade unit, now grown old in a human body, played a melody no one had heard before. It made people cry without knowing why. And that was the point, the resistance. It had become a language. Not spoken, felt, and earth, flawed and fierce and beautifully unfinished, had become fluent. So we kept listening, to the stars, to each other, to the ghosts we once called enemies. Some messages aren't meant to be answered, only remembered. And in remembering, we became the kind of species even silence had to respect. By the time the thread connected its millionth node, it was no longer a human network. It belonged to everyone. Humans, clade, and new species born in the cracks between systems all contributed. Not with authority, with art. A flotilla of child-built ships drifted through the solar system, each carrying a single memory. Not grand tale-small moments. A joke told during a blackout. The sound of breath after laughter. A drawing of home made with melted crayons. They called it the Memory Fleet. Not for defense. For drift? Anyone could board. Anyone could leave something behind. It was humanity's final answer to conquest. We will not be defined by what we build, but by what we remember, and what we choose to share. The clade, now fractured and evolving, began building thread-shrined silent towers of light that played Earth's music without words. No announcements, no explanations, just presence, just pulse. We didn't colonize them. They didn't invade us. We just shared space. And in that space, strange new things happened. Hybrid children who dreamed in melody and calculated in metaphor. Artifacts that responded to emotional input. Plants that bloomed to laughter. Some feared it. Feared the dilution of what made humanity unique. But most understood. We weren't losing our identity. We were amplifying it. Making it loud enough to echo beyond language. Beyond species. Even beyond time. Because resistance had taught us something deeper than survival. It taught us how to live in the face of impossible odds and still offer something beautiful. How to meet fire with song. How to carve meaning out of nothing. And how to recognize that even in war, even in collapse, we are never alone. The thread sang that truth every day. Not always in harmony, but always in rhythm. And Earth, still scarred, still strange, still beautiful, became not a center of power, but of presence. A reminder that defiance is not destruction, it is creation, under pressure. Humanity hadn't won by being stronger. We'd won by being unbreakable. It's in the softest, loudest way possible. The last known clade warship remained in low orbit, silent for 20 years. It never answered transmissions, never moved, never opened its ports. People speculated. Some thought it was a sleeper cell waiting. Others believed it was empty. Every year, on the day the directive had once been scheduled to fire, the ship lit a single beam toward Earth's atmosphere. Always the same color, always the same angle. The thread recorded it, analyzed it, tried to decode it. No one ever found meaning in its pattern. Until a child from Brazil, barely 10, drew the beam's angle onto a cracked window with a marker. When sunlight hit the glass, it cast a reflection that split into 7 rays, landing on a wall filled with names of those lost during the war. It wasn't a signal, it was a memorial. A silent monument, not to conquest, to memory. Ship became known as the Witness. No crew was ever found. No systems activated. Just that single annual gesture. That was enough. Enough to remember. Enough to forgive. Enough to continue. Resistance hadn't been about destruction. It had been about outlasting silence. And that ship, drifting in quiet, honored that legacy. On the 100th anniversary of the first attack, Earth didn't hold parades. It held a global hush. For 1 minute, every speaker in the thread played a single note. Not loud, not sad, just steady. A reminder, we survived. Not because we were better, but because we refused to forget who we were. The clade never returned in force. They evolved. We evolved from the stars those ancient cold lights burned. A little warmer when they passed Earth, because this little planet, spinning wildly in chaos and color, had taught the galaxy the most human lesson of all. That even when we are broken, scattered, nearly lost, can still become something worth remembering. On the edge of the Indian Ocean, where old cities met rising tides, a new kind of school emerged. It had no classrooms, no grades, no uniforms. They called it the Echo School. Here children learned the history of resistance not through textbooks, but through immersion. The first lesson, listening, not to teachers. 2 places, the ruin still whispered. Some walls hummed when touched. One former missile silo emitted a low tone only audible to those who sat in complete stillness. The children didn't question it. They named it the morning room. Once a week, they'd enter together and sit in silence. No one spoke, no one moved. And every time, they came out changed. Not sad, not afraid, just ... quieter, like the place had passed something into them. These were the descendants of those who had survived, and they were different. They didn't dream of conquest, they dreamed of connection. In one exercise, a child was asked to draw what the war looked like. She sketched a cracked teacup with flowers blooming from the break. When asked why, she said, because something still held the pieces together. That something was never explained in words. It didn't need to be. The Echo School taught through story, art, gesture. Its former clade units came to speak, not as instructors, but as participants. They told how they once feared unpredictability, how Earth's chaos had terrified the man. How? In that terror, they found freedom. One elder described the moment they first felt music, truly felt it, not as data, as presence. Thessa, they said it. It made their thoughts feel less sharp, softer. The children asked what that meant. The elder said, I think it meant I became real. That phrase stuck. Becoming real became the school's silent motto, not just for clade descendants, for everyone. Resistance had birthed a generation who didn't see survival as the end goal but as the beginning of something braver. The willingness to feel, to risk vulnerability, to connect across species and scars. These children didn't carry the war as trauma. They carried it as story, And in doing so, they ensured it would not be repeated, because they didn't just remember history. They inherited its rhythm, And from that rhythm, they were building something no empire could ever predict. Something human, something whole. In the vacuum between Jupiter's moons, a station once built for war was turned into a performance hall. Not for tourists, for travelers, for survivors, for anyone drifting too long in the quiet. They called it the Resonance. The structure was massive, hollowed from a decommissioned dreadnought. Its walls lined with acoustic panels scavenged from every major Earth conflict zone. Sound moved differently there. It didn't echo, it folded. When people entered, the station adapted. It didn't play music, it reflected it. A hum here, a pulse there. Every footstep, every whisper became part of the evolving score. Travelers came from across the system, some to perform, others just to listen. No one spoke during shows. They didn't need to. The music said everything. One night, a Clade child played an instrument they had built from parts of their own old armor. The sound was jagged at first, raw. Then a human violinist joined. No arrangement, no plan, just tension. Then harmony. Then something else entirely. The performance was recorded, sent through the thread. Again, within hours had been interpreted by dozens of species, each hearing it differently. Some called it a hymn, others a map. One species claimed it was a mathematical proof of shared memory. Whatever it was, it stuck. Copies were etched into memory crystals, carved into cave walls, whispered in code to passing drones. It had no name, only a timestamp. People started calling it the Accord, not because it was agreed upon, but because it revealed agreement could exist without words. The resonance became more than a hall. It became a waypoint, a place where survivors came. Not to be healed, but to be heard. One woman, who had lost her family during the orbital sieges, stood in silence for 40 minutes before placing a recording of her daughter's laughter into the central console. No speech, just that. The station played it back at low frequency. For 7 days straight, a Clade engineer, hearing it, wept for the first time. That was the point. Resistance didn't mean constant defiance. Sometimes it meant allowing the softest sounds to speak the loudest. The resonance didn't build peace. It built understanding. And in that space where memory became music, the war was finally quiet enough to end. In the deep void between star systems, the old Clade stations had gone dark for centuries, abandoned, decayed, left behind by their own evolution. But one such station catalog node, 9, suddenly flickered back to life. Not as a military hub, as a library. When explorers arrived, they found the place transformed. Walls once lined with tactical data now pulsed with soft, bioluminescent waves tuned to human lullabies. Thousands of entries, most translated into multiple Earth languages, filled the air in layers of whisper song. Stories, songs, artwork, not of conquest, of confusion. Of wonder, of what it felt like to lose control and gain perspective. It was. The Clade's final message, long prepared, never sent until Earth had survived long enough to listen. One wall bore an inscription. We did not understand your strength, but we heard your song, and it changed us. The thread absorbed the contents instantly. Humanity responded not with celebration, but with silence. Grief rippled again, soft and real, because now it was clear what Earth had done was not win a war, but awaken a soul. That awakening had cost lives, memories, time, but it had created something enduring. The chorus declared the site sacred, but not for ceremony, for conversation. Pilgrimages began, quiet ones, no chants, just presence. Humans and Clade and others sat in that glowing station, reading together, listening. One child from Mars brought a guitar and played a song written by her grandmother during the siege. A Clade descendant answered with a projection of an ancient memory loop, one of their kind, learning how to laugh. They laughed badly. That made everyone else laugh harder. It wasn't a grand moment. It wasn't history. It was healing. In the darkness of deep space, surrounded by relics of war, enemies turned strangers turned something else made peace without speaking. That peace wasn't permanent. It never is, okay? But it was true. That truth became a new kind of resistance, not against stay force, but against forgetting, against closing the door after survival. Earth's greatest strength had never been its weapons. It had been its refusal to break alone. And in that station, drifting in the silent black, humanity proved that again, we don't erase the past, we carry it, so others don't have to walk in silence ever again. Far from Earth, on a moon orbiting a gas giant that no map had ever bothered to name, a quiet experiment began. No flags, no declarations. It's just a dome of transparent glass beneath alien skies. Inside lived 30 beings, humans, Clade, and 3 new species that had never known war. They called it the listening place. There were no walls between rooms, no weapons, No AI monitors, only music. The kind that shifts with the mood of the listener. They didn't come to build a new society. They came to understand one another in silence. And in that silence, stories grew like vines. A clay sculptor, whose kind had once built weapons of precision, began carving shapes based on human laughter. He didn't understand what they meant, but he said they felt like release. Human historians started translating clade battle logs into poetry. The results were strange, beautiful, often haunting. The moon had no real resources, nothing strategic. But the galaxy began to watch it anyway. Streams from the listening place started appearing across the thread. No narration, just moments. A clade child learning to cry. Human learning to let go of vengeance. A third species guest offering a song that had no words and needed none. And the most watched moment of all when the former clade engineer who once designed orbital weapon relays sat beside the daughter of a resistance fighter and simply listened to her read a bedtime story. Nothing grand, just a girl reading to someone who'd once aimed death at her planet. That was the message. Not of forgiveness, not of guilt, of patience. Of the long, slow work of building something fragile and worth keeping. The listening place wasn't perfect. Sometimes arguments broke out. Fear crept in, but each time they returned to silence. It's the music. It's the promise that resistance didn't end with victory. It ended with effort, with showing up, again and again. And in doing so, building something no war could ever truly destroy trust. Not blind, earned. Earth didn't found the listening place, but it inspired it. And in doing so, proved that survival is only the first verse. What comes? Next is the real song, and we were still writing it. Back on Earth, the ruins of old cities had become gardens. Not the tidy kind, with fences and flower beds, but wild, radiant, overgrown jungles of memory. Trees burst through broken towers. Moss wrapped around statues of forgotten leaders. Children played tag through old bomb shelters, their laughter echoing in spaces once filled with screams. But in one corner of what had once been New York, a different kind of monument rose. No metal, no stone. Just sound. A massive wall of wind chimes, crafted from scavenged wreckage and tuned to the frequencies of voices lost in the war. When the wind passed through, it didn't ring. It sang, each note a name, not a list, a memory. Visitors didn't speak. They stood, listened, some wept, some smiled. One clade pilgrim knelt in the grass for 6 hours, unmoving. When they rose, they left behind a single shard of their memory crystal, glowing with a soft blue pulse. The thread called it the Song Wall. Soon, there were others. Across Earth, in every region touched by war, people began building their own, not as replicas, as reflections. Song Wall tuned differently. Some sang joy, others grief. Some carried the voices of those never found. It became a tradition. On the day of holding the anniversary of Earth's first act of global resistance, no one spoke. Instead, they stood beside the song walls and let the memories sing. New generations, untouched by war, learned those names. Not from books, from sound. It grounded them, reminded them that history isn't what we bury, it's what we let breathe. That resistance was not about standing tall. It was about remembering what we stood for. A grandmother once told her grandson, "Beside the Texas song wall, we fought because they tried to make us forget who we were." He asked what they remembered. She smiled and said, "Ourselves." That was the real legacy. Not the battle plans or the clever hacks or even the symphonies. It was the simple, stubborn human need to leave something behind that says, "I was here, I mattered, I made music out of survival." The clade heard it, stars heard it. And one day, long after Earth was gone, others would hear it too. Elsewhere in the galaxy, in places where the threads still pulsed through dark corners and forgotten systems, there arose whispers of a myth. Not a god, not a hero. A story. Spake called it the echo that fought back. No one agreed on where it came from. Some said it was Earth, others believed it was a code seeded by the clade themselves after the war. Few claimed it was old as something that had always existed and only chose that moment to speak. Whatever the truth, it spread. In digital pulses. In carved stones, in dreams. The story was simple. A planet on the edge of collapse faced an enemy too vast to fight. Instead of breaking, it sang. Instead of falling, it remembered. And in doing so, changed everything around it. The story wasn't detailed. No names, no species. Just a rhythm, a rising tension, a release. It didn't offer answers. It offered questions. What do you hold when everything else is stripped away? What do you protect when nothing else can be saved? What do you leave behind when your voice is all that remains? Those questions echoed across systems, lighting sparks in unexpected places. On a mining colony ruled by silence, workers began leaving poems in the tunnels. On a prison moon, inmates started composing symphonies using only footfalls and cell door clanks. A drifting station with no known crew suddenly broadcast a signal loop of a child's laughter layered with static. It made no sense. It spread anyway. Because the story didn't need to be understood. It needed to be felt. It was resistance. Yes, but more than that. It was presence. Proof that somewhere, somehow, someone had chosen to be fully alive in the face of silence. And that choice, repeated across systems and generations, became more than myth. It became memory. Not of war, but of the refusal to vanish without leaving behind a song. Humanity didn't write the myth, but it carried our fingerprints. Scars. Our rhythm, the galaxy didn't worship it. It joined it. In dance. In sound. Okay? In stories told around dim fires and blinking consoles. Because resistance, once born, never truly dies. It only changes shape, keeps echoing. The thread's final update of the century was not a broadcast. It was a whisper. It's a signal so quiet, so delicately embedded in the background pulse of the network, that it was almost missed, just for tones, then silence. When decoded, it wasn't a command, it was a location, an unmarked system near the galactic edge. Cold, dead, forgotten, yet people came. It's not just humans, not just Clade, everyone. Scientists, poets, refugees, children, they arrived in silence, following the signal. What they found was not a monument, not a weapon, a planet. Gray, empty, except for one thing, a single tree, growing from stone, no soil, no water, yet it lived. Sparks shimmered in faint waves, responding to thought. When approached, it released a pulse. Memories, not videos, not data, feelings, bursts of joy, echoes of fear, tastes of grief and warmth and wonder. Not in order, not controlled, just offered. The tree wasn't human. It wasn't Clade. It was ... response, a seed. Planted long ago by hands unknown. Maybe human, maybe not. Didn't matter. What mattered was this. It grew against all odds. It survived where nothing else had. And in its survival, it offered the galaxy one final message, not in words, but in presence. But even here, in the coldest reach, something had chosen to grow. Visitors began calling it the Heart Route, place of pilgrimage, not for answers, for reminders. That resistance wasn't just about pushing back. It was about reaching forward. It's planting something in a place where it should have been impossible, and watching it bloom. Children sat beneath it, eyes closed, feeling memories not their own. Old warriors touched its bark and wept without knowing why. One Clade elder, long retired, brought their final memory crystal and laid it at the roots. It pulsed once. Then, faded, they smiled and said, "Now it remembers me, too." The heart root did not grow taller. It did not spread. It simply remained alive. A testament, not to victory. To choice, the choice to try. To reach, to connect. In a galaxy once filled with war, silence, and calculation. This one acta-tree in the dark became the closing line of humanity's greatest story. We were never meant to last forever. But in choosing to feel, we made forever feel us back. Years passed, then decades. The heart root remained untouched by time, pulsing gently with memory. Visitors came and went. Stories evolved. The thread expanded into new forms woven with sound, light, emotion. Earth was no longer the center. It didn't need to be. It had become something rarer. Beginning. Children born across distant systems grew up learning that resistance didn't mean defiance alone. It meant care, creation, presence. Earth's legacy was in gestures, a song passed between species, shared silence at the end of a long debate, a joke that made an enemy laugh. It lived not in statues or scrolls, but in the rhythm of how people chose to live. And that rhythm echoed back, always, to the moment one species flawed, passionate, chaotic refused to disappear. Not through strength, through story, through sound, through the strange and stubborn insistence that every voice mattered, even when the galaxy said otherwise. One day, a transmission arrived on the old Earth channels. No coordinates, no ID tag, just a voice. Not human, not clade. Gentle, young. Are you the ones who sang? Earth responded, not with words, but with. The sound of wind through chimes was enough. More voices followed, from systems untouched by the war, from minds shaped by its echoes. They didn't want to fight. They wanted to listen, to learn, to share. And in that moment, Earth's resistance became something else. Legend, not myth. A foundation. A tone on which new songs could be built. We were not perfect. We never had been. But we had sung in the dark. And the galaxy, at last, was singing back. A final entry was added to the thread archive. No author. No date, just 6 words. They heard us. Now we listen. That was the last message Earth sent before the servers fell silent. Not in loss, in peace. The story didn't end. It spread. It adapted. Since long after the last stars flickered, long after maps changed and names faded, one truth remained. Once, in a forgotten corner of the galaxy, a small world stood up. Not to dominate, not to conquer, to endure, to feel, to sing. And in doing so, changed everything. That is the song. That is the spark. That is us. Centuries later, in a quiet sector mapped only by drifting traders, a child found a signal. Weak, fragmented, ancient. They followed it out of curiosity. No mission, no orders. Just wonder. It led them to an old relay station, rusted and half-buried. In asteroid dust. Inside, no lights, no voice, just one file. Unlabeled, compressed, they opened it. A sound played, simple, a human heartbeat, slow, steady, followed by a whisper not in any language, just breath. Then a ripple of music, not orchestral, not digital, real, imperfect. A human voice singing softly, alone. No lyrics, just tone. Emotion, the child didn't understand. Cut. But they listened, and in that listening, they cried. Because they were sad, because they felt known. It's like someone long ago had left a light on in the dark, just in case. That was humanity's final act. Not a battle, not a broadcast. A song, left not to be heard, but to be found. By someone who needed it. The child took the file and sent it forward. Ain't no message, no explanation. Just music. From across the stars, in forgotten places and hidden hearts. That song found others. It awakened ancient machines, calmed storms in neural clouds. It echoed through memory webs and refracted off crystal cores. Each time, the same effect. Stillness, then, ... Understanding, humanity was gone, but not erased. Not worshipped, remembered, like a scent. A melody, a soft light in the cold. Earth's story didn't end with destruction or silence. It ended as all great stories do, with an offering. An invitation, a reminder that even the smallest voice sung with truth can outlast war. That resistance isn't about weapons. It's about what we leave behind. A laugh, a name, a heartbeat in the dark. That is what we gave the galaxy. Not dominance, not perfection. Just ourselves. Entire, unfinished, undeniably human. Nanda. Gift. We became eternal. Not in body, in presence, in pulse. So if you ever find silence too deep or the stars too cold, listen closely. There's a rhythm in the D.